Okay, so we're going to go through the purchasing module here, and I'll start with the menu up here. And you can see the screen at the top, the purchasing menu. But later on, we're going to go back down through these icons because for myself, I find that when you're working in purchasing all day or you're working in any of these modules, if that's your main job, then the flowcharts are very helpful as to what the next step is until you get familiar with the system. So, but we'll start up here, and the first thing we're going to do is set up a new vendor. So to do that, you would go to Vendor and to New. And if you were in the CRM training, and I think maybe you were, we looked at the CRM accounts, and I mentioned that there was a button where there was a checkbox that showed that the CRM account was actually a vendor. And if you press the button, this is the screen that would come up. So what happens is when you enter a new vendor, you're automatically creating a CRM account. So this is how it would get created, and you can maintain them in either of the screens. So the vendor number is pre-selected, and that was something that was done in setup of purchasing. They've decided that they want just an automatic numbering system for every new vendor. You would select the vendor type, and unless it was an employee or a tax authority, you would select normal. And if this vendor is related to, say, a parent company that you're already dealing with, you can actually link it to that parent company by going in and selecting their CRM account list. Oh, someone else joined us. Katie's joined us. Great. Hi, Katie.
Hi.
And so you could select the parent company from your CRM list here, but we're going to leave that blank for now. And then this, you would put the vendor name, so just say ABC Company. If there was a number that was associated with that vendor that was meaningful, you could put it in there. And then you would select the terms that have been also set up in the purchasing setup. So let's say the terms for this vendor are net 30 days. And you can set a default ship via. So if this vendor most often would ship to you via UPS, then you could put UPS in there. And that would automatically populate the purchase order. You can change it on the purchase order, but this is just a default. So it just helps in the creating of the purchase orders, less things to type in, basically. This catalog cost column relates to distribution, the distribution module, and freight allowed amounts also you can put in there. Now, down here, the default miscellaneous distribution, this is mainly for the processing of the accounting vouchers, or the payables vouchers, I should say. And what this does is it helps the person processing the vouchers to determine what accounts things should go towards. So if this is a good example would be office supplies. If this vendor was an office supply vendor and you selected expense categories, then gave the default of office supplies, then every time a voucher is created, a payables voucher is created for this vendor from a purchase order, it would automatically come up and say, process this voucher using the office supply expense account. So it just makes it a little bit easier for the people in accounting to determine what account the items should go to for this vendor. It can always be overridden. It's not written in stone, but it just makes processing a little easier. You could also, instead of having an expense account, you could also have just an account as well. And if this was a tax authority, you could have tax. And it just helps with the processing of the vouchers. To the right, you can indicate, first of all, if this is a receiving site, and in this case we will, or a vendor-specific site. You can indicate whether these items could be, sales purchase orders on items. So you could put, I guess, a sales order or a purchase on this particular item or particular vendor, you can indicate if this vendor is qualified, and you can indicate here if you need to match a voucher to a purchase order amount. So normally this is an accounting function. Again, when you're processing the vouchers, you want to be able to match them up to the purchase order amounts. You would get a warning message on that. And then here, you can only sell, this vendor could only sell items that are defined in the item source. So you'll see the item source in a minute. If this vendor requires taxes to be placed on their purchase orders, you could select the tax authority here. And you can now enter in the contacts for this vendor. So contact number 1 would be the primary contact, contact 2 could be a secondary contact. And to enter the contacts, and just give you, this is a really good tip, to make sure you look first before you enter the contact, because once you enter a new contact, it goes into the CRM account database. And if you go in and check the list first to see if there's already a contact set up for this particular vendor, so especially if it's a vendor that you may have several accounts for, it's always a good idea to go in and check first. If there isn't a particular contact name in the list, then you could go in and just create a new contact by selecting New and enter the contact information, and it would automatically be assigned to this vendor's account, and you can indicate who the owner is. That would be the person that's entering the contact information, and add comments, characteristics, and uses of the contact, and then documents associated with the contact. And the same with second contact. And then you can enter the addresses, so you can put the main address and then alternate addresses here. And characteristics for this vendor, comments on the vendor, any notes that are required on this vendor. And then transmission is, you could check the checks radio button and enable EFT check printing, which would mean that it would be electronic fund transfer here, if this vendor requires that. So that's pretty much it for setting up a vendor. Do you have any questions? Okay.
No.
No? Okay, great. So we'll move on. And so the next thing we're going to cover is just while we're in the vendor area, I'll just show you how you can, well, we saw how to add addresses. You can go in and maintain addresses in this vendor file as well. If the address changes, it's pretty basic. You would go in and just change the address here. So that's, I'm just going through a list of things to cover here, so I just want to make sure that okay, so country code is not correct here, so I'm going to cancel out of here. Okay, let's take a look now at entering a purchase order. So there's a couple of ways that you can enter a purchase order. I mentioned about the icons down the side. If you click on the purchasing icon here, this relates to the menu items up here as well. It just gives you a flow chart of the processes that you would follow to create a purchase order. So you can see here you've probably checked the availability first of the item. Now we'll get into purchase requests in a second. You can create a purchase order right from here just by clicking on that icon. You would print the purchase order and then you would release the purchase order. So it kind of steps you through the process. And then it gets into the receiving side of things and then the payment side of things, all relating to the purchase order. So in order to create a purchase order, you would click on Create Purchase Order from here, or you could use the menu item up here, which would mean you would go down to purchase orders and then new. And I'll show you that in 1 second. You would enter the vendor name. So you can get this from your list of vendors, and you can search for the vendor. I was in there earlier looking for specific vendors, and this vendor has some purchase orders. So we'll select the vendor, and automatically the addresses that you just populated in your, when you set up the vendor, come up as the main address. If you needed to click on an alternate address, you could by clicking this ellipse button. And in the vendor setup, you can indicate whether this is a receiving site and which location it would be received into. And in this case, the default is coming up as the receiving site called day, and you could also receive it into the THR receiving site. Now, if you have dropship enabled, you could indicate dropship here if the site was a dropship site. And what that does is it will allow you to automatically, once the item has been received, it automatically bills it, creates the voucher, and says that this part has been received and has been drop shipped to its location. So, but it looks as though dropship has not been enabled on the setup. And if there were contacts assigned to this particular vendor, you would see them down here. And in this area, we've got some ship to contact information down here. And again, we talked about the ship via. So with this vendor, we had assigned a default of UPS ground. There could be other ship vias that you could change it to. But that is the default one, so you could go in and change it to FedEx or any other ship via that have been set up. Now you will go over to the, well, we'll just take a quick look up here, sorry. You have your order date, which is today, because we're creating it today. The terms, these were the default terms that we would set up on the vendor when the vendor is set up. The tax zone, same thing. And then right now, this purchase order has not been released, so the status is unreleased. And my name, I'm the person that logged in, so I'm the purchasing agent, but you could also change that. If you were just keying in purchase orders, then you could change the purchasing agent's name by selecting from the list. If you check print on save, you would automatically print, the purchase order would automatically print once you press the save button. Now we'll go into line items. So now you're going to enter your line items on the purchase order. You would select new, and you could do a search for the line item. And the search functions here, you can select any of these search functions. So if I am looking for a particular item, I can just go 30 and 3048, hit tab, and up comes the number. If I don't know the number and I just want to search on the description, and I think this was nipple, and press the tab button, anything that has the word nipple in the description is going to come up, and the same with the search through the description too. So you just basically start typing something and press the tab button. So this is going to bring up everything that has N either in the item number or in the description. So it's a pretty powerful search function there. So I know what the part number is because I've looked in already. So 3048 is a good part number for this vendor. And again, we're looking to have this item received at this site. And we can do an item alias search as well. And if there's a vendor catalog, we can take a look through the vendor catalog. And this is more for the distribution side. And if this is an inventory item, we select inventory. If it's a non-inventory item, you can select non-inventory, but you would have to indicate what expense category you wanted to assign it to. So if we go back to the different expense categories and it was an office supply category, you could assign it here, and it just helps with the accounting function, making sure it goes into the right account. but where this is an inventory item, so we'll leave it at that. You put the quantity in, so maybe we want to order 200. Now, once we get into order parameters and things, you'll see that if there's a minimum order by, it will come up and tell you that you need to purchase more than whatever, more or less of that item. And then you have the option, we've selected this vendor to be non-tax type, but if this particular item was taxed, you could assign it here. And then the unit price, if you click on this ellipse button, this is where you'll see your price list. So for this particular item, there are no price lists established, but we'll go in later on and we'll talk about how to set up your price lists. So if there was, you would see them listed here. So we'll put in a unit price of $10. And if there's any freight associated with this particular line item, you could indicate it here. And you can indicate the due date. So we could indicate that it's due in a week. And if it's, if you were in the CRM training, we talked about projects, you could assign this to a particular project as well, this purchase order, and this purchase order item, I should say. And then if there were vendor source item numbers, so like a particular vendor number, and you have those set up, and in this case, there is an item source vendor number here. We'll select it, and this will also appear on the purchase order. It happens to be the same number, but if it wasn't, it would appear on the purchase order, and a vendor description would appear. Now here, you can see there's no order policy set up for this item, and or ratios, unit of measure ratios. So this is just informational for you. You can indicate if this is a manufacturer, if there's a specific manufacturer, and again, this would have to be set up, but if there was a specific manufacturer for this item that you had to have the vendor supply from, you could indicate it there, any remarks, and again, characteristics. So you can save this item, and it allows you to go back in and add the second item. If you don't have a second item, you can cancel. Now there is a quick entry here, so this is basically just entering line items one by one, which is very handy to do. You have a large purchase order to do. Again, you can put characteristics towards this purchase order, notes, comments, and attach documents if you needed to. So are there any questions regarding the creation of a purchase order? Okay.
No, I'm done.
Was that a question, sorry? You good? Okay. All right, so I am going to say yes, and I'm not going to add that purchase order. So now what we're going to do is take a look at purchase requests. Now, we'll get into the scheduling later on next week. If you have done an MRP run, what the system will do is it will create purchase requests for items that you are required to purchase based on scheduling. So we're going to go in and take a look at some purchase requests here. So you can see here the item that we were dealing with earlier on that purchase order came up. I did an MRP run here today, and it came up with a purchase request. And a purchase request is just as it says. It's somebody, the system is saying you need to purchase this in order to meet your schedule. So it creates a planned order, and then someone will need to go in and determine whether or not they want to firm this order up, basically to get it ordered and sent to a vendor. So to do this, we're going to right-click on the purchase request, and we're going to, well, you have the possibility of looking at the availability of this item to see, do I really need it or not? And you can determine that just by clicking on availability, and you'll see that this is going to make this a little bit smaller so it's more visible. You can see that it shows the demand work order, this work order, but there's also a purchase order outstanding for this item. So we're going to release this purchase request, or you could delete it if you don't feel you need it. So we'll release the purchase request. And it's coming up and it's saying that you have one source for this item. You can select that source. Now it's also indicating here that there's already an unreleased purchase order that exists, and it will allow you then to add this item to that particular purchase order, which is a really good feature because you don't want to be creating individual purchase orders for the same vendor. So we're going to add it to purchase order, the unreleased purchase order that already exists. And we select it here. And so it gives you the option of changing the order quantity, pricing, and so on, just as we saw earlier with the line item screen. So we can save that, and that item will now be added to the original purchase order that was created. Okay. And that's a purchase request. Are there any questions about that? And you can see the purchase request is here as well, so it's a very handy way to just find it quickly. You can also select purchase request by planner or by site as well. So in this case, I did it by site, so it brings up all planner purchase requests by all sites. Okay. So now we've looked at a purchase request and converted it to a purchase order, but now we need to release the purchase order and we need to print it. So to print it, you can select the print icon here, and in the setup of purchasing requested that there's only one copy printed, and you would indicate the purchase order that you want to print here. I'm not going to print it, but you just hit the print button. It's pretty basic. And you can also do that from up here, going into purchase orders. You can release them from here. And actually, I guess you'd have to print it over here. So there's probably a way on the purchase order screen to print it. So, and releasing a purchase order, you would hit the release and select the purchase order that you want to release. I'm just going to shrink the screen up a bit. And right-click on it. You print it from here, and you can release it from here. And you basically press release, and that purchase order is now released. Now, when you're looking at purchase orders, you go into the release screen. You can select open purchase orders or unreleased purchase orders. So in this case, we'll select unreleased, hit query, and it's going to show you all the purchase orders that have not been released. This was the one that we were looking at earlier, so we'll just release it from here. And it drops off the list. Now I just want to spend some time just on the item sources. So earlier this morning, we looked at the item master, and we could indicate a source on the item master screen. And if we take a look at the purchasing menu and go to item source, we can take a look at the list. And these are all of the item sources that have been set up so far. So if we go back down to that part number that we were looking at here, 3048, we can see that the source is the piping supply company. You can set up all of your sources here as well, but it's probably easier to do it on the item master screen. And we can take a look at the item source here and update the pricing. So if we click on prices, we can see that there is, for all sites, there is a price selected of $3.57. We can add a new pricing structure for all sites. And if there's a quantity break, say from 1 to 100, 100, and the price is different, so say $3, you can add it. So when you hit the ellipse button, you would then be able to select this pricing structure for that particular line item if you were ordering 100 or more. So that's how you set up your pricing. But it's easier to do it on the, I think, on the item master screen. Are there any questions about the item sources? Okay, is there anything that I haven't covered that you'd want to talk about? If there is, let me know. One last mention, just the first day of training, we talked about the desktop windows, and you can see here the purchase orders that have been created. And it will also show you, if I can get my screen over far enough, whether when they're due and what the status is. So these down. So you can see that these are all unreleased. So this is a handy feature if you're working in purchase orders all day and you think you've released something, you can take a look and say, oh, I haven't released that one yet, so you can do an update. Okay, so that's, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Correct.
I didn't catch your question.
When you release it, does that just means you're sending it to the vendor?
Yeah, releasing it is like a firm order, and you have to still send it to the vendor, either by email or mail,
okay.
or electronically.
Okay.
But it does become a firmed order, so when you're looking at it, when we get into the planning side, when MRP runs, it looks at it as a firm order. The unreleased items are just as they are. It's just a plan, like a planned order, so to speak. It's not been released. It's not firmed up. Different screens you'll see when you're looking at supply and demand. On the inventory side, you'll see the firm orders. And so it is important to make sure that your purchase orders are released. If you don't release them, you can still print it, but they're not, you won't be able to receive the item if the purchase order is not released. So it's always a good practice to, when you're creating it, if it's going to be a firm order, to release the order once it's done the way you want it.
Okay.
Okay? Any other questions? Okay. Well, that's it. We have Brandy, Brittany, and Katie on, so that's all that I have for purchasing. And if you think of any other questions, just send me an email. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.